Welcome to the Alona Show. Well, you'll get the real headlines with none of the mercy. We're coming live out of Washington, D.C. for you on this Monday. Alona has the night off. I'm Christine Frizzell filling in. And tonight we're going to speak with two men who were held up at gunpoint by the Chicago police for live streaming. Then, in one of the most watched anti-war protests in decades, dozens of veterans tossed their medals onto the streets. And it's Monday hangover, so we'll talk about why the Obama campaign is going after Mitt Romney's time at Bain Capital when private equity donations favor Obama. We'll have all that for you tonight, including a dose of happy hour. But first, let's take a look at what the mainstream media decided to miss. Well, the last 3 days have been what some have rightfully called Summit Palooza. The G8 summit just wrapped up. The NATO summit is happening right now. And ahead this week is the EU summit. And as we know, with summits come protests. People who feel disenfranchised and want to have their messages heard by the most powerful leaders in the world. Those who make big decisions that have a global impact and therefore also get invited to such summits. And we can't totally scorn the mainstream media this time. They are covering those protests and the clashes taking place. But they're doing so in such a way that, you see the pictures, but you still get very little substance. Take a look.
Fierce confrontation yesterday between protesters and police left dozens of people injured on both sides.
Chicago bracing for more violent protests on the final day of the NATO summit.
Protesters rallying against NATO. They are now setting their sights on a new target, though. This time they're vowing to shut down the Boeing headquarters.
Several people were hurt, a few dozen arrested, and the prediction of possible violence around the NATO summit came true.
Last standoff, if you will, at the end of these protests. We got the line of the police right here with the riot shields up and the riot gear.
4 officers were injured. One of them apparently stabbed in the leg.
Dozens were injured and at least 45 people were arrested during otherwise peaceful demonstrations by thousands.
Clashes in Chicago, police in riot gear trying to push back thousands of protesters.
Protesters refused to leave, and it took police a long time to clear that, and there was violence.
American police officers with nightsticks and shields forcefully shut down a public demonstration.
The main focus today is going to be Boeing corporate headquarters in downtown Chicago. Boeing, of course, a big defense contractor.
What a mess. Protesters opposed to the war, among other things, vow to be back out on the streets again today.
All right, so there you have it. Lots of clashes. And, even when reporters do interview those protesters, you almost never hear the questions, what are you protesting? Why are you here? Questions about the police presence and police brutality are important too. But what about why these thousands of people have traveled to Chicago, in many cases taking days off work to voice their concerns? Is it because they're all crazy, as many media outlets would want us to believe about these protesters, as they did with Occupy? Listen, there are plenty of reports coming out today about which issues are being discussed inside NATO. Why not also talk about what's happening outside? There are plenty of questions the media hasn't asked in my lifetime, and in my parents' lifetime for that matter as well, especially when it comes to tough questions about war. They didn't do so with Vietnam, and it wasn't until tens of thousands of people had died before the motivation and strategy were called into question several years later. Then, when people here in this country, the mainstream media, was told by the George W. Bush administration that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, they repeated sound bites, read official statements on air. No one really looked into it. And as far as Afghanistan, often called the war of necessity, it's the same thing. It's been the longest war in history, extremely costly, both with money and with lives. So people are mad. But what do members of the mainstream media say about those people for getting angry, for questioning the U.S. government and NATO's decision to continue to be at war? Nothing. Because when they're not ignoring them altogether, they're talking to them about their arrest or quizzing them about what NATO stands for. So if you're curious about what large amounts of people, including veterans who have risked their lives for this country, if you're curious about what they're saying about the decisions of our elected leaders to remain in Afghanistan, or what their experiences have been, well, you'll probably have to look somewhere else. Because the issues and the messages of protesters is yet another thing the mainstream media has decided to miss. And it's not just the protesters getting the short end of the stick at this weekend's NATO protests. Journalists are also having a tough time doing their jobs, some apparently being targeted by Chicago police. Here's video of some of those journalists being pulled over by those police.
We're being raided right now. For those that are watching, we are being raided by the CPD as we speak.
What is this for, officers? What is this for?
I'm unbuckling my seatbelt.
They didn't give us an explanation to why they're stopping us. You're watching us live right now. 12 cars. 12 cars. We're pulled over by unmarked, ununiformed police cars. The whole time.
Well, if you were following this on Twitter, as some of us were, you saw tweets like this. Tim Pool tweeted, "Calming down, still paranoid after being cuffed at gunpoint." Luke Radowski tweeted, "Sadly, the footage that I almost got shot for shooting last night and was deleted by CPD cannot be recovered." Joining me are independent journalists Tim Pool and Luke Radowski. Hey guys, I want to thank you for being on the show. And I guess I want to talk to you first. Tim, just talk to me a little bit about your experience, this tweet. You were held up at gunpoint?
I didn't know that they had pulled guns on us right away until Dustin told me. But it was shaking to, you know, I made the assumption based on the hands up, he's swearing at us. I put my hands up. I was focused on making sure that my live feed was going out. And then they pulled us out and cuffed us immediately. So it was pretty jarring. And then afterwards, Dustin told me they had drawn guns on us. And that just like sent chills down my spine.
And Luke, I know that we've talked to you several times. You're an expert these days at covering protests. Just wondering a little bit how these protests in Chicago compared to, say, you know, the time you spent when you were in New York covering the Occupy protests.
These protests were definitely a lot more violent. Police officers, the CPD, were using the overhand method with wooden batons. A lot of people were bloody. There was a lot of blood in the streets yesterday. A lot of people got hurt, sadly. We tried to do our best to document everything live. We have a lot of video. It was very interesting to see the LRAD on the street once again on American soil. Troops, paramilitary all over the place. And it's very, very just very intimidating seeing all these factors come into play, especially with the involvement of the Department of Homeland Security, which had their vehicle when we were pulled over, and also interrogated my friend about me and was questioning me about me the night that we were pulled over at gunpoint.
Yeah, let me ask you about that. I read that tweet that you posted as well. One of your friends was actually stopped and asked questions about you. I mean, what were the authorities asking the officers? What did they want to know about you?
Well, just to make it clear, it was somebody that was affiliated with We Are Change Milwaukee. They stopped him, detained him illegally for 6 hours, and brought him to a Homeland Security fusion center. And they questioned him about how he knows me. They asked me by name, what I was wearing, who I was with, where I was staying. And the CPD pretty much got all that information when they pulled us over at gunpoint.
I guess, Tim, let me follow up with you. Talk to me about where you stand in terms of legal trouble. Are you still in legal trouble? What will be the consequences from here on out based on the activities over this weekend?
I don't think there's any legal trouble. We just we got detained. We got the typical interrogation. They searched through some of our stuff, banged some of our hard drives and batteries around. And then I was told afterwards by one of the supervisors that our vehicle matched the description of a vehicle they were looking for. And even though they admitted that mistake and then took the cuffs off of all of us, they continued to ask us questions and search through our belongings.
I guess I want to know a little bit more about some of the live streaming. I know that it was shut down for a time, and I think, Luke, you said that video was taken away. What was the reason given for this?
I just want to state one more thing. Our vehicle has New Mexico license plates. I don't think there's a lot of cars in Chicago that have New Mexico license plates. But yeah, we were streaming live. As soon as the officer said, "Put your hands out the window," my cell phone came out the window with my hands, and I overheard the officer saying, "Don't shoot, it's just a cell phone." I recorded them coming at us with guns. Ustream sadly could not actually recover that footage. I'm very sad about that. But I was in handcuffs. The officers were searching through the vehicle. They let me go, so I went back to my cell phone, started streaming them. The officer took the cell phone out of the hand, put me in the back again, and they turned off the footage and made sure it didn't archive, and the footage is deleted, and sadly the world didn't get to see it. But the few people who were on our Ustream and got that notification were able to watch it, but the footage was deleted and destroyed, so sadly there's no record of it.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, one of the things that I thought was so fascinating, and I guess it's just a sign of the times we live in, is how many people sort of became your guys' eyes and ears. People sort of tweeting at you, letting you know where police were, what they were seeing, what was going on. Tim, what was your reaction to this? Were you surprised at all?
I've been expecting something like this, I suppose, and I'm really grateful that I have people who watch what I'm presenting. I know that there were several of our friends were detained, had their car impounded. Some other live streamers were detained and interrogated, and they didn't have the visibility and the people watching their backs like we do. So it feels great that people are paying attention, but it also brings to light the other journalists who are sort of being, I guess, detained and harassed in the same way.
Well, I mean, that's what I was going to say. I mean, it's surprising to me every time I hear about this or see this, but this isn't new, and it's not even, not something we dealt with recently with the Occupy protests, with journalists being turned away, being kept out, having their, stuff taken away. Why haven't we gotten past this, I guess, in terms of police? I mean, police were so ready with their riot gear and with their batons. Why weren't they ready to deal with journalists?
I'm surprised. I don't know, Luke, you have an answer?
I have no idea. We can only speculate, but I think George Orwell puts it very well. In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. Now, we can only speculate, but what me and Tim do is very different than what the mainstream media does. We provide raw, unedited, live, unbiased perspective view for 12 hours, sometimes 12 hours live for people. And a lot of times, I mean, Tim recently, his video was used to clear a protester of criminal charges in court. I mean, having that camera in your hands is extremely powerful. It's pretty much equivalent to having the truth in your hands. And what me and Tim are trying to do is just trying to encourage everybody to get out there, get their cell phones out, film everything, because it's no longer an officer's word against a protester's. It's the truth, and the truth cannot be hidden.
All right, well, we appreciate you weighing in with us today. I hope you keep us posted with all that live streaming. Tim Pool and Luke Radowski joining us from Chicago, Illinois.